Hi, I'm David Stodolny for Stodoe Studios, and welcome to the making of Spider-Man Moves to the Country. If you haven't seen the short yet, make sure you watch it here, and then once you've watched it, come back and watch the making of. So now, today we're going to be talking about the animation process, and even though it was a very short cartoon, it was only 2 shots long, there was still a lot of thought that went into it. So let's talk about that. So when I start my rough animation stage, I'm just animating the main key poses that will describe what the action is. And then depending on how far apart you put those frames from each other will determine how fast or slow that action will be. So as you can see, this first frame, I drew it pretty clean. I've got all these rough lines behind it. But this is way tighter than I would normally animate as I get into it. Because right now I'm just really trying to, at this first pose, I need to see exactly where everything's going to start. But as I go through it, as you see going forward, I get really rough. Like, there's no tied down lines there. In some frames, I don't even draw the full arm. Like, it's really, really rough. So this is the first pose again. I nail it down exactly how I want it, and then I can sort of get looser going from there. So as I start, the next key pose is just a slight head turn because I want that really kind of staccato kind of, what? Like, I don't want it just to be one pose to a big pose. So I go there to there, hold there for a bit, and then there's an anticipation. So see, his body starts to move there just a little bit, just to get a little bit of compression down as he's turning because it's a bigger move that second time. And then I hold there for a while, and then again I get this anticipation pose, which what I'm trying to do here, you can see things are starting to change. It's not just him crouching down, also you can see his arm here is starting to come up, and the reason that is because as he jumps here, I don't want it to just be a really straight kind of anticipation and then jump. I want him to kind of lead by swinging his arm around and then taking off. And it'll just, to me, that gives that nice arc of that arm taking off will give it a bit more of a fluid action rather than just a straight down and straight up pose. From this key pose, I really have him, bent over here, really compressing him as far as I can. And then I pretty much very quickly after this anticipation pop him straight up. I want him to be like a nice straight line because by doing that it'll show that fast kind of snappy jump, because if he's going to jump high he needs to do it quickly. If he was to jump slow he wouldn't get off the ground. So then as you scroll through, then he's in this sort of very Spider-Man like pose where his his knees are up way higher than most people would ever do when they're jumping. His arms are in that kind of that kind of hanging pose or whatever, and you get this kind of nice kind of line action going through with his eyes looking down. You know exactly where he's going because he's very when the superhero's moving that fast, he kind of has to always see where he's going next. So from there, he goes down. Actually, there's a little bit more hang time. So to get that kind of weight up in the air, he's jumping, and then he has to change direction. So his body just kind of rotates as he starts coming down. And then, again, this other really fast drop frame. And then again, you get this nice kind of line of action just to really show the direction that he's going. And if anything goes that fast, you wouldn't be able to keep your body tight. It would really go loose anyway. So that's what that is. And I leave, if you see, I also leave this leg up longer than the other one rather than have both legs land at the same time. And the reason I do that, it's a very common tool that we use as animators. You don't usually want everything to move at the same time. You want to break the movements up a little bit, and that just creates more interest for the audience. Otherwise, it looks very what we call pose to pose. And you don't really want the audience to see where all your keys are because then it feels fake. You want it to feel a bit more organic. So then as I'm moving through, He compresses, he lands in that, you know, cliche superhero Matrix type pose with his head looking down, arm up still, this arm's landed. And then in that same pose, I want that sort of, you know, compression and then wait and then look up. And then he's like, okay, I'm set to go. I'm preparing to go. And then so he looks, holds for a bit, and then does a slight push off. He's starting to compress and get that anticipation into the movement. So one hand's staying on the ground. And then all of a sudden, I wanted this really fast push off. And I actually looked at some reference because I couldn't figure out what that pose would be. So I actually looked at some reference of people doing track and field. And I think I typed in 100-meter dash just to see what that first push-off pose was. And I love seeing these guys. It's just like this really strong line of action with the head right down. They're not even looking. They just need as much energy pushing off that back foot as they can to get that speed up. And so that's what I did there. And then as he goes forward, now here's kind of a cheat what I did. Because I knew he was going to do a couple of runs, a couple of strides before he got to the end of the roof, I didn't necessarily need to animate every single run he did. So I actually have this copied onto a peg, and a peg is just a way in Toon Boom, which is the software I use, to take a moving animation and move it around after you've animated it. So once I turn the camera and the peg off, you can see he's just running in place. So that's the way to get the run working the way you want it, where you only have to do one run cycle and then you can loop that, and it's all in place. And then what I do once the run is done, I put the camera and the peg movement in there, and you can see now it looks like he's running across the roof. And all you have to do with the peg, all I did at that part is because the feet were sliding a bit, so all I had to go in is when he landed and touched the ground, made sure I moved each frame into place where the heel stayed the same spot. So that way it didn't look like he was slipping and sliding on the roof. So once he pushes off on that strong pose, he gets into the wide stride pose, which is when the legs are out and the arms are at their extremes. And then I have the plant, the part where the foot hits, and then the cross with the which I call the mid stride. So he's landing, his hips come down, and then that's when his feet are landing and this foot starts to cross. And then again just after he crosses, and then the stride. And that frame is just pretty much, I did that one time and then just copied and pasted it. And that way I have this. And then once he comes to the edge of the roof, during his last stride, his arms kind of start leaning forward as he gets into that anticipation of his big jump. And so you can see he's starting to bend over, and this hand's going to start coming forward and getting into this anticipation pose. That's where his head's down and he's really bent over with his arms up. And then again, you get that big push-off pose right here, which is again a big stretch. You know where he's coming from. I've actually, since the final version of the short, I changed it. His back arm isn't this far back anymore. It felt too flourishy. It looked like he was dancing in the air, and I didn't really like that. So I have more of a structured kind of jump. Now this one, as I zoom in to get a better look, I just sort of continued on where I left off, but I actually, if you see, I actually went back and reanimated a couple frames here. And the reason I did that is because it's such a quick action and the cut is going to happen across the action. I wanted to give myself a chance in editing to figure out where the best time to cut would be. I didn't know if I should cut after the pose that I had already done, or if I should, because it's such a fast action, maybe replay a bit of that action before I cut. So I just wanted to make it safe for later in the editing process, to give myself more options. So I went back and just animated a couple frames. And so here, again, I have that anticipation pose that I had before. And then the big stretch pose you can see here is where I actually ended up keeping the arm. Before you saw I drew it more like this. and then he jumps. And see, this pose, see, I have him kind of in this weird pose where his hands are kind of huddled over here, like this. Who really jumps like that? I don't really know anybody. But as I was animating, I actually had him in this stretched pose, and then he shot the web. But what I did is I felt like there wasn't a big enough change. Because this scene is so far away, every action needs to be huge for the audience to be able to see what's going on. Some people will be watching this cartoon on their phones, and you need that action to read as much as possible. So I found if his pose where he's shooting the web, his arm is out, if his arm was already out before he shot his web, you wouldn't feel that push. So what I did is I had this kind of compression like this as he's jumping. That way when he shoots the web, it's this big kind of push, and it's this big sort of change of shape, and the eye reads it better as the web comes out. And I thought that worked really well. See, so you go from this to this, and it's definitely a change. Pretty much to make sure I was doing this on the right angle, I actually drew another layer of an arc so I could make sure I followed a proper arc to make sure it looked right. And because if you don't draw your arcs on a big move like this, you'll end up finding like they're going to be jittering all over the place. So it's very helpful to draw guides for yourself. So he's doing this, and it's just sort of a slight change up here. Not much is changing, but as he falls, I just tilt his torso up, like really, really reaching for that web to grab onto something, and then finally it's too late. You can see the frames up here are much closer together, and that's just because you want that nice, slow kind of hang time until he's like, crap! And then he just falls, and things speed up as he gets closer to the ground. And then I just have a big kind of U-shaped pose here to show that he's really, just falling fast, and then he's kind of splats just over one frame. And naturally, if someone was actually to fall, there'd be some movement as they fall and some settle, but I wanted it to feel really cartoony and hard, so I didn't want much animation after he fell. Also, once I had the effects, it added more to it. So that's how I did the rough animation. So once I've got all the keys working and I've timed them out and I play it back, it looks fine. Now I have to go in between it. And here's where it just really starts to get fleshed out and you see what it'll actually look like. So you can see before I just had the key from there to there. Those were the keys. But now you can see I've got a few keys in between. If you watch the elbows here, you'll see there's a little bit of bend as he turns to get that compression. And then he looks up, holds again, and then here's a big move. And as you can see here, here's where I was talking about the arm. You kind of see he anticipates with the arm here, continues raising it, it's up by his head, and then it does this like reversal, so it's almost like he flips it, like he's kind of like, whoosh, and it just gives this nice kind of arc to the action. So see as he flips it, he goes whoosh, whoosh. And yes, I do sound effects like this when I'm animating. And then he's jumping. But you can see, now one thing you'll notice too, again, I haven't drawn every little pose because it doesn't matter. Like if I was to actually go in, once I actually go and clean it up, I'll be drawing all this. But because this animation, he's moving so quickly, and because he's so far away and he's a pretty simple character, I normally would draw everything, every detail frame by frame. But because he's moving so fast, I actually, you won't necessarily see any inconsistencies as much. So I just actually cleaned it up as I went, and just animated very rough like this. So I actually left some frames where he didn't have any arms, but when I cleaned it up, I added those. He's actually moving very fast here, and I'm actually drawing every frame. We shoot at 24 frames a second, and there's one drawing for every frame. But after he's up in the air, look, there's actually 2 frames where he's in the same pose. And then here, same thing, same pose for 2 frames. Now the reason I do that, that's called shooting on 1s or 2s. And for very quick actions when there's a lot of information that has to happen, you animate on 1s to show, so you have more information, more drawings to describe the action. But for when a character isn't moving that much, You can actually get away with shooting them on 2s, which is 2 drawings, and it still plays smoothly, but because he's not moving that much, you don't necessarily have that much information you have to cover. So that's one way to save a lot of time, but for very fast motions, I'll always use 1s, and it's kind of a trick that pretty much all 2D animators use. And so here, as he lands, again, it's slow, and then here it's fast again. So this is on 1s because this is a very fast action. And then once he gets down into here, again, he's not moving that much, so I have it shot on 2s. And then he pushes off and runs. You can see, again, it's very rough. I just got the main blocked shapes in there to know what it is, but I didn't clean up every detail because you don't need it to see what the action is going to be. So now comes the cleanup stage, which for someone with very shaky hands like me, it's a nightmare for me to do cleanup. Also, because these shorts are so quick, I tend to do them very quickly, and it's a very painstaking process to really trace it. So I tend to go very fast. On feature films, people take so long to do this. They make sure every line is perfect. I kind of rush through this stage, but again, it's for a short, silly little joke, so I tend to kind of rush through these just to I feel like it's okay for what I'm doing, but I know some people that are amazing at it do it amazingly. But as you can see, I just sort of cleaned up on another layer. I just traced over the rough drawing, and as I go forward, you can see, for those really rough drawings that I had before, like this, where I didn't have any arms, I just sort of cleaned it up. Oh, and look, that's something I didn't even realize I did. Look, so as you can see here, there's actually, the arm isn't where the arm is in the rough stage. And that was probably, as I actually went through and cleaned it up, I realized the arm didn't have enough transition. The information wasn't there on how the arm got up there. It probably popped. So I probably went back in and actually re-drew it down here so you had a smoother action. That's probably what that is. And then I continued and landed, and then again. It's all the same stuff, but clean. And then the next stage is I go through and color it. And that's simple. I go through and just choose each one of these colors. I make a palette for myself of the colors of each character, and then I'll start just going in and flood filling the character. This is, for some reason, I know a lot of people don't like this stage. I love it. It's just, I find that fast I can see my piece starting to come together and sort of get completed the way I've seen it in my head. So that's what I do, and then just go to the next frame. Usually what I do just to speed up, I'll just do all the reds at once, go to the next frame, all the reds, that kind of stuff, and then that's how I do it, and then you get something like this. So once I've got everything painted and filled, I bring in the background. So last but not least, once everything was colored and the background was in there, I added the effects. Usually I do the effects at an earlier stage, but this time I left them until the very end, almost because I wanted to see if the animation worked on its own without any effects, because there was a chance that it may have looked hilarious not having anything. It did look hilarious that he just stopped, but I felt like because there was so much happening with the web and this bright, beautiful background that you're seeing for the first time, the background courtesy of Andrew Woodhouse, thank you, he's an amazing art director. He painted this for me and I love it. But you're looking at so much in this last scene that I was worried that you actually wouldn't see what happened because you're watching where the web's going. So I felt like when I watched it, I needed some kind of dust cloud to hit so you know that Spider-Man hit the ground. So that was a lot of fun. I always enjoy doing effects. It's one of the fun stages for sure. So as you can see, when he hits the ground, it's just sort of a cloud of smoke. It starts small and then instantly pops to a big shape. And I like that kind of explosion feeling where it quickly happens and then slows right down. And so it slowly grows here. Not much. You can see it's really not moving that much. And that just gives that kind of big, billowy cloud feel. And then it slowly begins to dissipate. So I break off like, little pieces, and then those start to dissolve smaller, and then they break into smaller pieces. And that's pretty much all I did. And then I added a few things to this once it was done. I actually added a transparency layer, so this is the full thing like this. It's very cartoony, very, very thick, but then I added a transparency to it, so it starts off big and then slowly disappears. And then what I also did is when you render it, I applied a gradual blur to it that actually blurs over time. So when the dust cloud starts, it's very, very soft, but it's still pretty visible and you can still see the shapes. But then as it dissipates and gets further away, I actually increase the amount of blur to really make it feel like it was really breaking up. And that's how I did that effect. As for the web, which was the biggest pain in the butt for this animation, it seems like it'd be easy because, you have this simple line and that's all you're drawing. I thought I'd be able to bang that part of the animation out so fast. And in the rough stage, it was very fast to do. You can see it's just very sketchy. I didn't have to spend much time. I just made this arc, and I pretty much drew the main key poses of this as well, and then just in between it, I did this extreme pose, and maybe this extreme pose, and this one, and then this one, and this one, and just sort of kept doing that, and then went back and in between it, because it was such a slow action, there was going to be hundreds of drawings to do there. So it was easy in this stage because I didn't have to be perfect. You can see the line is very sketchy and very quivery, but it didn't look like a web. So when I actually had to go and clean it up, I tried to make this perfect line by, using a pencil and just drawing, the line like that, trying to make it as smooth as possible, which that looked easy, right? It is for one frame, but if you do that for every frame, it's really hard to get a perfect line at the perfect shape over and over, and because it's moving so slowly, it means the drawings have to look exactly the same, otherwise you get this fluttering going on throughout the line, and it didn't look like this graceful web blowing in the breeze. And so I actually turned to a new tool, which I've never actually used before, but it was the line tool, and it was the polyline, which was simply this. You could actually draw a line and then shape it like this and choose the tangent and just slowly shape it, and I went based on the rough drawing, and this helped me get that smooth line that I needed. I had much more control. I could go in and bend the handles and make sure it was the exact line that I wanted. So that was the big pain in the butt in this short, but other than that, that's how I made this cartoon. So hopefully that shows you what goes into these cartoons even when they're really, really short. If you have any questions that we didn't answer in this video, make sure to write us in the comments below. Also visit us at stodostudios.com for more content and more contests and art and all that kind of stuff. And also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm David Stodolny for Stodoe Studios, and we'll talk to you soon.